Hello, and welcome to this episode of Illuminating Insights. I'm joined today by Eric Willeke. He is one of the folks that I've known for a long time, and I'm so excited to have him here with us today. Eric really works to help reimagine portfolio management for better outcomes and happier, less stressful lives. Welcome, Eric. We're so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Trisha.
You are spending so much of your time working with leaders in reimagining really what portfolio management could be. Tell us more about what that means.
I think what we've seen over the last decade of agility is this increasing focus on managing work for some reason. And I think a lot of that comes out of the history of portfolio management being around project management and the need for portfolios to be completely about essentially changing funding money into outcomes. And yet so much of agility has come up as a people focused and how do you build effective teams and how do you help teams flourish in changing environments. And we've seen a lot of attempts at different ways of marrying those two needs up. And the more I look at it, the dominant answers out there just aren't serving the executives and the leaders that need to be responsible and accountable for the outcomes of portfolios. And we see this in the way people talk around project to product. We see this in some of the struggles we see people have as they attempt to scale up their scaling frameworks into the portfolio. I imagine you've seen it over the years in the maturity outcomes of various companies and how they engage looking for help in that space.
We have. So, what are some of the answers that you're coming up with? Because it's different in every organization, but there has to be some synergy.
There is, and what we've seen thus far is really a need to step back a half step and map your landscape a little more broadly. People are really good at tracking work. People are really good at tracking financials. People are kind of okay at tracking where their people are and what they're doing and how many people they have, although some of the largest enterprise, I was stunned how hard of a problem it is just to count people. Um, but what people aren't really good at right now is marrying up the human structures with the systems landscape, with the process map, with the work map in the context of their aspirations and the pile of obligations they have. And helping people learn to look at that based on fundamentally where they are in a lean way. One of our favorite sayings right now is you have to start where you are, and to start where you are, you have to know where you are.
Mhm.
And people spend so much time, I think, looking at the future state and where they're trying to get to, they don't recognize what that's going to do to their current org shape and where they're at. And yet, managing a portfolio and its assets isn't just about managing the work, it's about the people, the structure, the systems, and all those things I listed.
It's so very true. I mean, we're working with some organizations that they're so large they actually don't even know where the bloat in their system is. And so understanding the current structure of their organization is one of the things we're helping them with, through our platforms and those types of things. But how do you work with organizations and really help them say, where are we today? Where do we find the you are here point in the map?
Some of it is literally mapping and drawing the organization and making this the same way like software is so abstract, and that's one of the reasons we struggle with it. We've made org shape and humans very abstract, and all these things we work with, we're like trying to connect 5 or 6 completely abstract dimensions in our head, and no two people have the same view of that reality as a result. And making it visible, making it tactile in many cases, goes a long way towards helping people get on the same page as a leadership team. And once they agree on the current state and even go past agreement to like the beginnings of emotional acceptance of the current state, it goes a long way towards helping a team align, especially an executive team aligned as far as where they want to go next. And bringing those different perspectives together and bringing the leaders into alignment in ways that they may have thought they had before, but have never truly had, just creates a zone of stability in the organization. It creates a space in which everybody else can start to line up and get behind and support and put energy in a common direction instead of being pulled in a lot of different directions by leaders who thought they're pulling in the same direction.
It's such a simple idea when you say it that way, but it's a lot harder than it sounds.
I mean, we could say that about everything in agility that we've
Mhm.
talked about in the last, what, 20 years at this point, 24 years. The core concepts are really simple. And then we do our best to make them really complicated for some reason. So a lot of it, you mentioned like the complexity of an organization, people don't even know where their bloat is. I actually kind of look at it from the other lens. It's like the complexity of the organization, it creates this massive fog of war that people don't even know where the value is. And you can look
That's
at it from either side, but I like to say, okay, let's find the thing we care about and amplify it instead of trying to find all the stuff we don't care about, because that's not where my attention is.
I really like the idea of flipping the lens. We've talked a lot lately. I was just at a uh, conference that one of our customers put on a week or so ago, and they really talked about changing the
Mhm.
intention about the way you think about things, and changing um, your perception of things, and pausing because there's so much in this world that's negative. So take a moment to pause and what's the positive thing that you're looking for? What's the intent that you're looking for? And when you start to look for that, it's so much easier to really create value and find the value.
Mhm.
Um, so intentionality is really important. And I think you find that in your work as well.
Yeah, that aligns really well with a lot of what I do because, like, we're in the lean world, and a lot of people love to say, "Oh, you should limit WIP." And while that's true, and that is a great description of how to manage the physics of work in an organization, I love the sentiment of create focus instead. And because it's generative, it builds on what you actually need instead of feeling like taking away and cutting. And both are valuable. And you're to create focus, you have to remove. You have to be subtractive and not additive. But by focusing on the thing you're trying to create, it becomes a lot more clear as to the reasons and the justification and everything else. And I find just removes a lot of the resistance to it. Same thing. We can talk about strategic intent. We can talk about strategic themes. We can talk about initiatives. I like the term aspirations, and I like to understand who my neighbors are in the portfolio, literally the portfolio neighborhood and the groups around you, and talk in terms of what are their expectations.
Mhm.
And those become my obligations, and they're things I have to keep true in order to help the company function. But it's a lot easier to think of it when it's, oh, here is somebody's expectation of us. That makes it human. That makes it somehow more easily relatable for people.
So true. So true. So how do you help leaders decide to move forward with this type of engagement? How do you help them think differently and think that these new ways of working aren't just the next, flash in the pan? How do you help them to move and find the courage to do that?
There's two pieces. One is whenever possible, shrink the change. Some changes are big. I mean, you can't get away from, but a lot of things don't need to be about rewriting your entire portfolio process. It can be about let's figure out where you're at and what the next step is. What's the next two steps? Where can we get slightly better? Where can we stabilize even? Let's not even try to fix stuff. How can we stabilize the current environment so that you can make better decisions? And then whenever possible, I tie what those steps are, those small shifts that they need to make directly to pain points or directly to aspirations. Um, Despite having been somebody doing agile transformations for well over half my career at this point, I don't actually like the idea of agile transformations. I like the idea of using agility to make the most important work go better, which in turn inspires a lot of people to be more agile and pull a lot of change through behind it. But I always want to attach transformation and change to what's the most important strategic initiatives in the company and how do we make those more successful? Because if they're an important strategy, almost by definition, the company should be betting on them. And if we're going to make a big bet, let's align all the stuff in the big bet instead of having a modernization effort over there and an agile initiative over here and a DevOps thing down there. Oh, and we have this big corporate initiative. Like that's splitting people's attention four ways. That's not creating focus. So one of the things Gareth Evans and I talk about in the book we're writing is how do you bring those multifaceted improvements together around your most important product investments instead of making them a bunch of different things?
So instead of creating change after change after change and having the change fatigue that everybody's talking about, really focus on what's most important and just change there.
Not quite. It's not just avoiding change after change after change, because that's inevitable. It's about avoiding the situation where you have four different changes that don't stack up when you could have one slightly larger change that is accomplishing all the goals.
Ah, okay.
And it's about not trying to be agile over here and be DevOps down there and be modern over here and be digital up there and then go to market in Bolivia or wherever. It's how do we use that go to market motion to pull through agility, DevOps, modernization, and everything else in and put a lot more energy behind that as a result.
So showing how one effort can have all of those things tied together. So, oh, we're actually making sense.
Yeah.
We're sharing what this go-to-market value will bring through and how all of this is tied together so that we can show the value that we're delivering for our organization through change.
And then through that new product creation or that new business effort, however that impact is, yeah, you'll have the business impacts come through with that. But in the process of that, you'll also build new competencies, new capabilities, and more effective systems that you can then pay back and percolate out through the rest of the organization. So again, we've shrunk the change to one area. We've taken an area where there's already a lot of interest in change and the driver of high energy because it's strategic in nature. And we've compounded the benefits there. So it shrunk the change, but also put it in an environment where there's a lot more energy and support for it. And then once we've learned those skills, and people, frankly, people facing hard problems are always open to interesting new solutions and ways of working.
Mhm.
They're not tied to the old because they're already buried in the new. Now we can take what we've learned that has been proven successful, demonstrated value in the organization, and use that to just literally percolate, move slowly out through the organization like a spreading wave.
Which is a wonderful idea because then people actually start to look at what is the problem that we're trying to solve,
Mhm.
and they come up with their own solutions because they're not so tied to what's happened before.
Exactly.
So that's how you get new ideas and new solutions. It's a wonderful way to look at things.
Yeah, I find it simple and much more organic in nature for how people want to engage with their work and how change naturally percolates. And then as you're starting to get into there, you've already had these maps that I talked about that show you the channels it's likely to go through. So I'm not going to just pick up this agile thing I learned in this new initiative and throw it 5 units away. I'm going to look at my neighborhood and say, who are the people I'm working most closely with that I have obligations to? And how can I show them how I'm serving their needs better? How do I look to the organizations that I rely on and make their lives easier so that they can deliver more effectively to me? And by spreading it along the connections of the organization, you're making it a human problem and a human spread, not some top-down organizational hub and spoke jump across the org type approach.
So if someone wanted to start this type of initiative, where would you recommend they start? At the top of the organization, with one work stream? Where would one begin, Eric? Because this sounds like an amazing thing, but where would you start?
Honestly, it depends on who you are. If you're at the top of the organization, sure, start there. If you are a release train engineer working in one safe release train, maybe you should start there. And I do put a lot of value not on this organizational ideal of what's the right answer, but instead, what's the answer that can actually do something? What is the place where you, as an individual, as a human, can take a step and move things along a little better? Where can you reach with your network and get a little change coalition going that starts to make things better? And if I'm working with a CIO and their direct team, that is the whole portfolio, but it may not be out into the business units yet.
Mhm.
On the cases where I have the privilege of working with leaders in the business, it's ironic, we actually start there and we only pull through a little bit of the IT change and the technology change. We don't have the privilege of saying, y'all need to go fix everything, because that's not how it works. You get to change where you own. If somebody's in a team level position, cool, go work with the people you have in your network, your peer scrum masters, the product people you support, your devs, and figure out what the most effective stability is that you can create and advocate for that.
Are
Um,
you seeing this type of change happen outside of IT equally as inside of IT? Because one of the things we are enjoying is really working with teams across the organization, not just being pigeonholed in technology anymore.
what I've found is the more we de-jargon the ideas, the more, at least personally in my career, I've discovered the business has wanted this all along. And it's easy to stereotype and say, oh, the business wants this because then they can change their mind all the time, or the business wants this because they just don't want to spend as much. But really, and I'll think there's this guy Barry that I worked with in a telecom when I was an architect. This is before I even got into change management, but I was delivering as a vendor to his organization, and I'm like, I'm not going to do this in anything but the best way I know how. So of course we're going to do this in Agile. And we started working, and I sat down to one with him like after towards the middle of the first iteration, and I was like explaining, okay, so we're going to work this way up. It's okay. He's like, you don't need to explain this to me. It just makes sense. And he was one of the best product. He you'd call him a product owner. He sat in the business. He was actually the customer, but he was one of the best product owners I've ever worked with as a result. And to him, it just made sense. And the more I work with leaders outside of technology, the more that they are grateful to unwind the career of horrible interactions they've had. So
That's
the most successful transformations I've ever participated in have all started with the business and come into technology because all
I
that
think
resistance is
that's
gone.
that's very telling. That's very telling that, we need to really, um, to borrow a phrase from some of our friends in DC, reach across the aisle
Hmm.
and work business and technology together because our organizations are whole. They're not just one or the other. So when the two sides of the coin can work together, it's going to be a holistic transformation and will inherently be more successful.
Yeah, one of the things I've always pushed for is to have joint sponsorship, where it's not one side or the other leading it. It's we are working together to improve our product delivery, including technology.
What's one of your favorite stories of transformation?
Hmm. I have probably half a dozen large scale, big company transformations I could tell the story of, but I'm actually going to tell a story of personal transformation and one leader who was the group program manager in charge of one of those. And it was about $110 million effort, 18 months. They were behind schedule. They were 6 months behind on an 18-month schedule. Um, and he came from a finance and M&A background, and he knew this was not going well. But he wasn't a technology expert, so he didn't, back to what I said before, he knew the interactions were bad, but he didn't know why or how to fix it. And the journey that he took over the course of that 6 to 8 months we worked together, they didn't need me for the last 4 months because everything was actually going really well. Um, was amazing because he went from questions like when is this going to be done to what happens if we don't do this? Cost of delay type questions. What happens if we wait to do this? Um, I would rather, and he started telling people, it's like, I'd rather you didn't do these four things because this feels more useful right now. And there was a balanced viewpoint. It wasn't just, oh, business demand, feature this, feature that. It was, oh, you need to get test data management sorted out so that we can actually validate we're not going to cause a lot of harm to our customers. Cool. That sounds like it's a problem if it waits. And he started using cost of delay thinking, and he started mapping relationship maps, and he just really internalized all of the skills of agility without ever having to talk about agile. And then he took that from role to role to role, well outside of technology. We're talking in one role he was in was managing a group of like 800 nurses. And he started just taking these ideas and applying them very effectively everywhere he went. And he's still doing it to all awareness. I talked to him a few months ago, and he's still doing it in a new role. So I think
That's
my
fantastic.
favorite stories are when I see leaders internalize our things, internalize the practices, internalize the values and the mindsets, and they stop talking about doing it and they just start leading it. So those are the transformations I'm most excited about. And yeah, that delivering early, that delivering at a lower cost and a better business result than any of their peer group doing the same initiative because it was a market level activity. Um, Cool. I love the financial and the impact outcomes. Watching a group grow a 0.5% in a market that's decreasing 4% a year was a pretty compelling outcome for agility. Paid a whole company's bonuses for a couple of years. Those are cool stories, but for me, it's always about the human change and the leaders that just are able to lead differently as they move into the next phase of their career, whatever it is.
Human change is lasting change because then that person, as this one has shown, they take that change with them wherever they go, and they
Yeah,
can start to propagate that new way of thinking in so many ways, and it touches so many lives beyond, them and beyond that one engagement.
yeah,
So, what a
and
great
that's
story.
and that's core to that example and a couple others similar are core to why I love to pile agility into a business change and then let it percolate back out. Because after that big initiative, people go back to other roles, but they take all these skills with them, all these mindsets, and all these ways of working.
Fantastic. Any final thoughts for our listeners today?
I think I'll just go back to the quote that I started with. Lean is all about starting where you are and trying to go someplace pretty cool. But to start where you are, you have to know where you are. And I encourage people to take the time to step back, look at the reality of the situation, and make sure you and your peers and the people you need to work with agree what that reality is. And when you get that agreement, so many other questions, so many other challenges just become much easier because you're at least all imagining the same starting point.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time today, Eric. It was a pleasure to just listen to your stories and learn about what the work you're doing in portfolio management. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today. This has been this edition of Illuminating Insights. Thank you for listening.